I'm Stella, 34, female, and after years of being treated as the family ATM, I finally closed the bank for good. It happened at my younger brother Caleb's 24th birthday dinner, in a restaurant I was paying for, surrounded by the family I was supporting. The moment wasn't born from a single spark of anger, but from a slow-burning fire that had been smoldering for over a decade. Looking back, I can see the trail of kindling they'd been laying all along. My family consists of my mother, Helen, my father, Richard, and my brother, Caleb. On the surface, we probably looked like any other middle-class family. My father was a retired history teacher, and my mother worked part-time as a librarian. They were comfortable but not wealthy. Caleb, 10 years my junior, was the golden child, the miracle baby they'd had later in life. He was charming, handsome, and coasted through life on a wave of natural charisma and my money. I, on the other hand, was the responsible one, the serious one, the one who had pursued a stable, lucrative career in software engineering, a field my parents vaguely described to their friends as something with computers. My role as the family's financial backstop started subtly. When I landed my first big job out of college, I was ecstatic. I had my own apartment, my own life, and a salary that felt astronomical. The first time they asked for help, it was for a minor emergency. The water heater had broken, and their savings were a little tight. I was happy to help, wiring them the $1,200 without a second thought. It felt good to be able to give back to the parents who had raised me. But the minor emergencies soon became monthly occurrences. Caleb needed braces, and their insurance didn't cover the full amount. Their car needed new tires. Caleb wanted to go on a school trip to Spain, an essential cultural experience that my mother insisted would shape his entire future. Each time I'd get a call, usually from my mom, her voice laced with a carefully crafted blend of helplessness and pride in my success. "Oh, Stella, you're just so good with your money," she'd say. "We don't know what we'd do without you." The favoritism was as clear as the financial disparity. I remember one Christmas, about 5 years ago, that laid the dynamic bare. I had flown home, my suitcase full of thoughtful, expensive gifts. I'd bought my father a first-edition copy of a history book he'd mentioned wanting, my mother a beautiful cashmere sweater, and Caleb a top-of-the-line gaming console he'd been begging for. In return, they gave me a generic gift basket from a department store, the kind with assorted jams and crackers. Later, I saw the same basket on sale for $25. Meanwhile, they had all pitched in, using money I'd given my mother for groceries the week before, to buy Caleb a designer leather jacket that cost over $800. He wore it to Christmas dinner, parading around while my father clapped him on the back. "Looking sharp, son," he'd boomed. No one seemed to notice or care about the stark difference in gift-giving. They saw my income not as my own, but as a family resource, like a shared utility. Another time, the engine on my 5-year-old sedan blew out. The repair was going to cost nearly $4,000. I called my parents, not to ask for money, but just for some sympathy. My mother's response was, "Oh dear. Well, you're so responsible, I'm sure you have a little nest egg saved up for things like this." A week later, she called me to ask for $3,000. Caleb's spring break trip with his friends to Cancun was coming up, and he desperately needed a break from the pressures of his communications degree. She told me how worried she was about his mental health, how he needed this release. "He's so sensitive, Stella, not tough like you," she'd whispered into the phone. The implication was clear. My problems were manageable inconveniences, while his were critical emotional needs. I paid for his trip. I put my car repair on a credit card. Living like this was like being in a constant state of low-grade emotional fever. I loved my family, or at least, I felt a deep, ingrained obligation to them. I wanted their approval, their affection. I thought that by being the reliable, generous daughter, I would eventually earn the same warmth and adoration they showered on Caleb. But with every dollar I gave, the respect I craved seemed to move further away. My generosity wasn't earning me a place of honor at the family table. It was just cementing my status as the furniture. I was the sturdy, dependable chair everyone could lean on, but no one ever stopped to admire. This dynamic became my normal. I'd set a budget for myself each month and then a separate, unspoken budget for my family. The family fund, I called it wryly in my head. It covered Caleb's rent for his off-campus apartment, his car payment, his tuition gaps, his grocery bills, his concert tickets. It covered my parents' unexpected expenses, which had a funny way of coinciding with Caleb needing something new. I was a 34-year-old woman with a six-figure salary, but I was living more like a new graduate, carefully watching my own spending, so I could afford to fund my brother's carefree lifestyle. I hadn't taken a real vacation in 3 years. My own dream of buying a small house felt impossibly distant, not because I couldn't afford it, but because my family's needs always seemed to come first. The resentment was a knot in my stomach, tightening with every wire transfer. I was just waiting for the day they would finally see me, Stella, not just the source of their comfort. I was waiting for a sign of gratitude, of genuine appreciation. That sign never came. Instead, I got Caleb's 24th birthday dinner. The 2 months leading up to Caleb's birthday were particularly draining. The requests for money, which had once been sporadic, now felt like a constant, torrential downpour. It began with an email from my brother with the subject line, "Urgent school stuff." He needed a new, top-of-the-line laptop. The one I'd bought him 2 years prior was now, apparently, painfully slow and unfit for the demands of a modern communications curriculum. He sent me a link to a sleek, silver machine that cost more than my first car. He explained that all his project partners had won, and he was falling behind because his technology was antiquated. I called my mother, hoping for a reality check. "Mom, this laptop is almost $3,000. Does he really need this one?" Her sigh was heavy with practiced disappointment. "Stella, you know how important his education is to us. He's trying so hard. Do you want him to be the only one struggling? His professor is a big deal in the industry. He needs to make a good impression." The unspoken accusation hung in the air. If I didn't buy the laptop, I would be actively sabotaging my brother's future. I bought the laptop. The charge hit my credit card with a dull thud of resignation. A week later, I saw a picture of Caleb on social media. He was at a music festival with his friends, the new laptop nowhere in sight. He was wearing a brand new outfit, one I knew for a fact I hadn't paid for. I felt a familiar, bitter pang of foolishness. Then came the issue with his apartment. Caleb and his two roommates had apparently thrown a party that had resulted in a broken window and a large stain on the carpet. The landlord was withholding their security deposit and charging them for the damages. Caleb's share was $700. He called me in a panic, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that a guest had gotten out of hand. "I can't ask Mom and Dad," he said, his voice a frantic whisper. "They'd freak out. You know how Dad gets about responsibility. Please, Stell, I'll pay you back, I swear." He had sworn to pay me back at least 24 times over the years. I had never seen a single cent. Yet I transferred him the money. The thought of my father, Richard, lecturing Caleb about irresponsibility was almost laughable. My father hadn't been responsible for a major family expense in years. His lectures were reserved for Caleb, but the bills were always reserved for me. The final straw before the birthday dinner was a conversation about my own life. I had been talking to a realtor. I'd found a small but perfect condo in a nice neighborhood, a place that would finally be mine. It was a big step, and I was excited. I cautiously mentioned it to my mother on the phone, hoping she might share in my joy. "A condo? Oh, Stella, that's ambitious," she said, her tone hesitant. "Are you sure you can handle a mortgage right now, with all your other obligations?" I froze. "What obligations, Mom?" "Well, you know," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Your father and I aren't getting any younger, and Caleb still has another year of school. We all just depend on you so much. We wouldn't want you to be overextended." The words hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't seeing my potential accomplishment. She was seeing a threat to their financial security. My dream of owning a home wasn't a milestone to be celebrated. It was an inconvenience to the family's cash flow. She was telling me, in the kindest, most manipulative way possible, not to have a life of my own because they needed mine to fund theirs. That conversation replayed in my mind for days. It was the first time the subtext had become text. My role wasn't just to help out in emergencies. It was to be their permanent safety net, their retirement plan, and their son's benefactor, all rolled into one. My own aspirations were secondary, a luxury to be considered only after all their needs and wants were met. A week before Caleb's birthday, my mother called to discuss the plans. "We're thinking of that nice Italian place downtown, Trattoria Emilia," she announced cheerfully. "Caleb just loves their lobster ravioli." I knew the place. It was expensive, the kind of restaurant where water was served in heavy glass bottles, and the bread came with 3 different types of infused olive oil. It was a celebration spot, and I knew exactly who would be expected to pick up the check. "Sounds great, Mom," I said, my voice flat. "Wonderful, and Stella dear," she added, her voice turning syrupy sweet. "Would you mind covering it? It's a special occasion, his 24th. It would just mean so much to him, coming from his big sister." I felt nothing. The knot of resentment in my stomach had hardened into a cold, dense stone. For years, I had been bending over backward, contorting myself to fit their expectations, hoping for a crumb of appreciation. Now I saw it for what it was, a transaction. They provided the illusion of familial love, and I provided the cash. The condo conversation had been the final veil to be lifted. They didn't want me to be happy. They wanted me to be available. "Sure, Mom," I replied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I'll take care of it." As I hung up the phone, I looked around my small, rented apartment. I saw the vacation brochures I'd stopped looking at, the home decor magazines I'd stopped buying. I had been shrinking my life, year by year, to make room for theirs. And in that moment, I knew something had to change. I didn't know what I was going to do, or how I was going to do it. But as I marked Caleb's birthday on my calendar, I felt a strange sense of finality. I was walking into that restaurant as the family ATM, but I had a feeling I wouldn't be walking out as one. Trattoria Emilia was exactly as I'd pictured it, dimly lit, with dark wood, white tablecloths, and the low hum of quiet, expensive conversations. The air smelled of garlic, wine, and money. When I arrived, my family was already seated at a round table in a plush, velvet-upholstered booth. Caleb was in the center, flanked by my mother and father, basking in the attention like a young prince holding court. "Stella, you made it," my mother chirped, her smile a little too bright. She gestured to the empty seat beside my father, the one furthest from the center of action. "Standard procedure." I slid into the booth, offering a tight smile. "Happy birthday, Caleb." "Hey, Stell. Thanks for coming," he said, barely looking up from his phone. He was texting, a wide grin on his face. My father, Richard, nodded at me. "Stella, good of you to join us." He had his benevolent patriarch face on, the one he used when he felt things were going as they should, with everyone playing their designated part. The dinner proceeded as it always did. My parents fawned over Caleb, asking him endless questions about his classes, his friends, his plans for the summer. He answered with exaggerated stories, making himself the hero of every anecdote. They laughed at all the right moments. I was a spectator, an audience member at a play I'd seen 100 times. They asked me one question: "How S work?" I said, "Fine," and they all nodded, their curiosity satisfied, before the conversation immediately swiveled back to Caleb. Ordered a simple pasta dish. They ordered appetizers for the table, 2 bottles of expensive red wine, and Caleb, of course, got his lobster ravioli. I watched them, feeling a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a family on television. I saw the way my mother would lovingly brush a piece of lint off Caleb's shoulder, the way my father's eyes would crinkle with pride when Caleb made a witty remark. They had never once looked at me that way. My accomplishments were practical, expected. Caleb's very existence was a cause for celebration. As the main courses were being cleared, my father raised his wine glass. "A toast," he began, "to my wonderful son. 24 years old. You've made us so proud, Caleb, to your future." "To Caleb," my mother echoed, her eyes misty. We all clinked glasses. I took a small, bitter sip of wine. But Caleb wasn't finished. He held up his hand, a smug, self-satisfied look on his face. I'd like to make a toast, too, he announced, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of the tables nearby. He stood up slightly, holding his glass high. He looked around the table, his eyes skipping right past me before landing on me with theatrical weight. I want to make a toast to my big sister, Stella, he said. The table went quiet. For a fleeting, foolish second, I thought this was it. The moment of gratitude. The acknowledgement I had been craving for a decade. My heart gave a pathetic little flutter. He smiled, a wide, predatory grin. To the family ATM, he declared, his voice ringing with performative affection. May she one day find a life. The words hung in the air for a second, sharp and ugly. Then my father let out a loud guffaw. My mother followed with a high-pitched titter of laughter, covering her mouth with her hand as if Caleb had said something endearingly naughty. They both looked at me, expecting me to smile, to play along with the joke. In that meant the years of quiet resentment, the swallowed frustrations, the thousands of dollars, all of it coalesced into a single point of cold, perfect clarity. The smoldering fire inside me didn't erupt into a hot rage. It went ice cold. The knot in my stomach didn't tighten, it dissolved, replaced by an unnerving calm. They weren't just taking my money. They were mocking me for giving it. They saw my sacrifice not as a gift, but as a personality flaw, a sign of my pathetic, empty life. I didn't flinch. I held my wine glass steady, my eyes locked on Caleb's. I slowly raised my glass to meet his imaginary line of sight. Thank you, Caleb, I said, my voice even and low. Everyone was still chuckling. I let them. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, savoring the bitter taste. I placed the glass back on the table with a soft click. Then I turned my head slightly, my gaze sweeping over my mother and father before landing back on my brother. And I'd like to make a toast, I said, my voice carrying the same calm, clear tone. The last of their laughter died in their throats. They could sense the shift in the air. To the birthday boy. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Caleb's smile faltered. Who just lost his lease, his car payment, and next month's tuition. I said the words without malice, stating them as one would state the time or the weather. They were simple facts. I saw the comprehension dawn on their faces, moving from confusion to shock to horror. Caleb's jaw went slack. My mother's hand flew to her chest, her face pale. My father's jovial expression hardened into disbelief. I didn't wait for a response. I calmly placed my napkin on the table. I picked up my fork, which was still resting on my plate, and set it down with a quiet finality. Then I stood up. The movement was fluid, unhurried. I slid out of the booth, my purse in my hand. I looked at their three stunned faces, a tableau of sudden panic. For the first time in my entire life, I had all of their attention. Enjoy the ravioli, I said. And then I turned and walked out of the restaurant. I didn't run. I didn't look back. The low hum of chatter resumed around me as I moved past the other tables, a ghost leaving her own haunting. The cool night air hit my face as I pushed through the heavy wooden doors, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I could breathe. They didn't laugh after that. The walk to my car was surreal. The city sounds, a distant siren, the murmur of traffic, laughter from a nearby bar, seemed both muffled and hyperclear at the same time. It felt as if I had stepped out of a stuffy, suffocating room and into the real world. I got into my car, the same car I had put on a credit card to pay for Caleb's Cancun trip, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. My hands were perfectly steady. My heart, which should have been hammering against my ribs, was beating at a slow, even rhythm. I had expected to feel a tumultuous crash of emotions, guilt, regret, anger, sadness. Instead, what washed over me was a profound, almost unnerving sense of peace. It was the quiet that comes after a long and painful storm has finally passed. The destruction was all around me, but the battle was over. I had simply stopped fighting a war I was never going to win. I started the car and began the drive home. It was on the freeway about 10 minutes later that my phone, sitting in the passenger seat, lit up. It was my mother. I glanced at the screen and let it ring until it went to voicemail. A few seconds later, it lit up again. My father. I ignored that call too. Then came a third call. Caleb. And so it began. For the entire 30-minute drive home, my phone was a relentless beacon of their panic. A call would end, and another would immediately begin, a frantic rotating cycle of my family members. Mom, Dad, Caleb, Mom, Dad, Caleb. It didn't stop. I didn't answer. I just watched the screen light up, the names flashing like warning signals of a system meltdown. The system I had just unplugged. When I got to my apartment, I dropped my keys and purse on the small entryway table and leaned against the closed door, listening to the silence of my own home. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text message, then another, and another. I walked over and picked it up. The call log was a long, ridiculous list of their names. I counted them. 21 missed calls already. Then I opened the text messages. Mom, Stella, where did you go? You need to come back here right now and fix this. Mom, your brother is devastated. How could you be so cruel on his birthday? Dad, call me immediately. This behavior is unacceptable. Caleb, WTF was that? Are you serious? Caleb, you can't do this to me. I have rent due next week. Mom, Stella, please, I'm begging you. You're scaring us. You've ruined your brother's special night. The messages were a predictable cocktail of commands, guilt trips, and feigned concern. That was entirely focused on the consequences for them. There was not a single message asking if I was okay, not one person acknowledging the toast that had started it all. In their narrative, my reaction was the problem, not the action that had provoked it. It was as if Caleb's public humiliation of me hadn't even happened. I felt a bubble of something rising in my chest, and I was surprised to realize it was laughter. It was a dry, hollow sound, but it was genuine. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of them was almost impressive. They truly did not get it. They did not see me as a person with feelings, limits, and a breaking point. They saw me as a malfunctioning appliance. Their focus wasn't on why the appliance had broken, but on how to get it working again as quickly as possible. I put my phone on silent and set it face down on the counter. Then I went about my evening. I made myself a cup of tea. I turned on the television and watched a mindless comedy show. Every few minutes, the screen of my phone would light up from across the room, casting a brief, desperate glow. I ignored it. Around 11 p.m., there was a loud, insistent knocking on my apartment door. I froze. I lived in a secure building. They would have had to buzz to get in. They must have waited for another resident to enter and slipped in behind them. Stella, I know you're in there. Open this door. It was my father's voice, booming and angry. Stella, please, honey. Let's just talk about this, my mother pleaded, her voice trembling with manufactured drama. I didn't move. I just stood in the middle of my living room, my heart finally starting to pound. This was the escalation I had known was coming. They weren't used to being ignored. You're acting like a child, my father yelled, his fist banging on the door again, harder this time. Open up right now. I walked silently to the door and looked through the peephole. I could see all three of them huddled in the hallway, their faces illuminated by the stark overhead light. My father looked furious, my mother looked tearful and distraught, and Caleb just looked bewildered, like a child whose favorite toy had been snatched away. He was staring at my door as if he couldn't comprehend why it wasn't opening. I backed away from the door and sat down on my couch. I put my hands over my ears, not to block out the sound, but as a symbolic gesture to myself. I was done listening. They banged and called out for another 10 minutes before, I assume, the threat of a neighbor calling security made them give up. I heard their footsteps retreating down the hall. I picked up my phone again. The final tally before they had resorted to showing up in person was 42 missed calls. 42 attempts to pull me back into their orbit, to reset the system to its factory settings. I scrolled through the new texts. More of the same, but with an escalating tone of panic and fury. I opened my banking app. My finger hovered over the screen. With 3 taps, it was done. I canceled the recurring transfers to Caleb's account for his rent and car payment. I logged into the university's tuition portal, where I was listed as a third-party payer, and removed my payment information. The digital ties were severed. I felt a profound sense of loss, a deep, aching grief for the family I wished I had. But underneath it was the solid bedrock of resolve. I had spent my entire adult life making myself smaller so they could feel bigger. I had financed their comfort at the expense of my own happiness. Tonight, they had held up a mirror, and for the first time I had refused to accept the reflection they showed me. I had walked away. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was not going back. For 2 days, I lived in a bubble of self-imposed silence. I blocked their numbers temporarily to stop the barrage of calls and texts, creating an artificial peace. I went to work, focused on my projects, came home, and reveled in the quiet. It was a fragile tranquility, the calm before the inevitable storm, but I cherished every moment of it. I knew they wouldn't give up. Their entire lifestyle depended on my capitulation. The confrontation happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was returning from a grocery run, my arms full of bags when I saw them. Their car was parked in the visitor's spot of my apartment complex. All three of them, Richard, Helen, and Caleb, were standing by the front entrance, waiting, ambushing me. There was no escape. My heart sank, but I squared my shoulders and kept walking. As I approached, my mother, Helen, rushed forward, her face a mask of anguish. "Stella, oh thank goodness, we've been so worried," she cried, reaching for my grocery bags. I pulled them back instinctively. "I'm fine, Mom." "Fine, you blocked our numbers, you disappeared," my father, Richard, boomed, stepping forward. His face was red, his posture rigid with indignation. "What on earth has gotten into you?" Caleb hung back, scuffing his shoe on the pavement, a sullen, resentful look on his face. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Let's not do this in the parking lot," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You clearly want to talk. You can come up for 5 minutes." They followed me up to my apartment in silence. The tension was so thick I could feel it pressing in on me. Once inside, they stood awkwardly in my small living room while I put the groceries away in the kitchen. I was stalling, gathering my thoughts, building my resolve. When I finally turned to face them, they looked like a delegation sent to negotiate a surrender. My surrender. "So," my father began, crossing his arms, "are you ready to explain yourself? Are you ready to apologize to your brother?" I stared at him, incredulous. "Apologize, for what exactly?" "For what?" My mother's voice rose, cracking with disbelief. "For humiliating him, for ruining his birthday, for causing this entire family so much stress and pain. Caleb has been a wreck." I looked over at Caleb. He finally met my gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and self-pity. "You really meant it, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low. "You're cutting me off." "Yes, Caleb, I am," I said simply. "Why?" he demanded, taking a step forward. "After everything I'm going through, after everything we've been through as a family." This was my opening. For years, I had swallowed my words, buried my feelings, and smiled through the dismissiveness. Not anymore. "Let's talk about everything we've been through, shall we?" I began, my voice steady. I walked over to my desk and picked up a file folder. I had been preparing for this. "I started keeping records a few years ago. Let's see. 3 years ago, I paid $3,000 for your essential spring break trip to Cancun. That was the same month my own car's engine died, a fact I mentioned to you, Mom, and you told me you were sure I had savings for it." My mother flinched, as if I'd slapped her. 2 years ago," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "I bought you a $2,800 laptop for school, which you claimed was critical for your success. Oddly, just last month, I also paid a $700 damage fee for a party you threw at your apartment. This year's Christmas, I spent nearly $1,000 on gifts for the three of you. I received a $25 jam basket. You, Caleb, received an $800 leather jacket that Mom bought using the money I sent her for groceries." My father's face was turning a darker shade of red. "This is ridiculous. We are a family. We don't keep ledgers." "I do," I shot back, my voice finally rising. "I have to, because for the last 10 years I haven't been a daughter or a sister. I've been a line of credit. I have paid for your rent, your car, your clothes, your food, your vacations, your tuition. I have put my own life on hold. My dream of buying a home, a dream you, Mom, actively discouraged because you were worried it would threaten my obligations, has been sitting on the back burner so that he, I pointed at Caleb, can live a life free of any responsibility or consequence. Tears were now streaming down my mother's face. We never asked you to do that, she whispered. You were doing so well, we thought you wouldn't mind helping out. You didn't just think I wouldn't mind, I said, my voice dropping again, thick with the pain of a decade of hurt. You expected it, you were entitled to it, and the moment I became a person with feelings, you all short-circuited. It all came to a head at that dinner, when you all laughed. I turned my full attention to Caleb. That wasn't a joke, Caleb, that was what you really think of me, that I'm a pathetic workhorse with no life whose only purpose is to fund yours. You said it out loud. You and Mom and Dad, you all laughed. You laughed at me, at my life, the life I've been sacrificing for you. Caleb finally broke. It was a stupid joke, I was drunk, it didn't mean anything, he yelled, his face crumpling. You're taking everything away from me over a joke. No, I said, shaking my head. The calm was back. The joke was just the final bill being delivered. It was the moment I finally realized that I'm worth more than what I can provide for you. I am not your ATM. My father stepped forward, his anger replaced by a cold, hard tone. You're being selfish, Stella. After everything we've done for you, raised you, clothed you, fed you. You did what parents are supposed to do, I interrupted, my voice ringing with disbelief. And I have paid you back for that 100 times over. When does it end? When I'm 40, 50, when you've bled my retirement account dry? No, it ends now. I walked to the door and opened it. The 5 minutes are up, you need to leave. My mother sobbed openly now. Stella, don't do this, don't throw away your family. I'm not the one who threw it away, I said, looking at each of them one last time. I'm just the one who finally stopped paying for the pry. Vilge of being disrespected. Goodbye. My father glared at me, his eyes full of a fury I had never seen before. He grabbed my mother's arm and pulled her toward the door. Caleb stood frozen for a moment, his face a mess of confusion and anger, before turning and stalking out without another word. I closed the door behind them and slid the deadbolt into place. The click echoed in the silent apartment. I leaned against the door, my body trembling with the adrenaline of the confrontation. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. But as the sound of their footsteps faded down the hall, I knew, with absolute certainty, it was also the rightest. The bank was closed, and it was never, ever reopening. The weeks following the confrontation were a study in silence. The angry calls and texts ceased, replaced by a cold, heavy void. It was a strange kind of grief, mourning a relationship that was still technically there, but was, in practice, over. At work, I threw myself into a complex project, finding solace in logic and code, things that had clear rules and predictable outcomes. At home, I started to reclaim my space and my time. I bought a new, plush rug for my living room. I spent a whole weekend painting my bedroom a calming shade of blue. These were small acts of self-investment, things I'd put off for years because the money or energy was always directed elsewhere. The first real crack in their wall of silence came about a month later, through the grapevine. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, called me. She was a kind, no-nonsense woman who had always been a bit of an outsider in the family, and she and I had always shared a quiet bond. Stella, it's Carol, she said, her voice gentle. I heard there was some unpleasantness. You could call it that, I said wryly. Your mother called me. She was beside herself, Carol continued. She told me her version, of course, that you had a sudden, inexplicable outburst and cut them all off for no reason. And you didn't believe her? I asked, a sliver of hope in my voice. Honey, I've known your mother for 60 years, and I've seen the way they've treated you and Caleb differently since you were both in diapers. I figured there was more to the story. I told her everything. The years of financial drain, the constant dismissal of my own life, the toast. She listened patiently without interrupting. Good for you, she said simply when I finished. The validation in her voice was so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. It's about time someone stood up to them. They enabled that boy into helplessness. She then gave me the update I hadn't known I was waiting for. Caleb, without my funding, had been forced to face reality. He couldn't make rent and had to move out of his apartment, back into his childhood bedroom at my parents' house. He'd had to sell his car to pay for his outstanding bills. To cover his tuition, he'd been forced to get a part-time job waiting tables, which meant he had to drop 2 of his classes. His life of leisure had evaporated overnight. According to my aunt, he was miserable, and he blamed me for all of it. My parents, in turn, were feeling the strain. Their comfortable retirement was suddenly not so comfortable without my supplementary income. They were having to dip into their savings to cover their own expenses, something they hadn't done in a decade. The system had collapsed, and they were all tumbling in the wreckage. A part of me felt a grim satisfaction, but it was overshadowed by a deep, aching sadness. This wasn't what I had wanted. I had just wanted their respect. And then the unexpected happened. About 3 months after the birthday dinner, I received a letter in the mail. It was a single, handwritten envelope with my father's familiar, slanted script. My hands trembled as I opened it. I expected another volley of anger or a guilt-laden plea, but it was neither. The letter was short. Stella, I have been thinking about what you said. About the laughter, I don't have an excuse for it. You were right, it was cruel. I have not been a good father to you. I don't know how to fix what I have broken. Richard. That was it. No apology, not really. No request for forgiveness, just a stark, painful admission. It was the most honest thing my father had ever said to me. It didn't erase the years of hurt, but it was a crack in the stone wall of his pride. It was an acknowledgement that my feelings were valid, that my pain was real. I read the letter 10 times, the ink blurring through my tears. It wasn't a magical fix. I didn't call him. The family wasn't suddenly healed. But something inside me shifted. The anger I had been holding onto, the hard shell of resentment I had built around my heart, began to soften. His letter allowed me to see him not as a villain, but as a flawed man who had made terrible mistakes and was, perhaps, just beginning to understand their cost. In the months that followed, I continued to build my own life. I got pre-approved for a mortgage. I started looking at condos again, this time with a joy that was untainted by guilt. I reconnected with old friends, went on weekend trips, and rediscovered the hobbies I had let wither. I was learning to put myself first, not in a selfish way, but in a way that was necessary for my own survival and happiness. The silence from my mother and Caleb continued. My aunt told me my mother was too proud to admit any wrongdoing, and Caleb was too busy feeling sorry for himself. The path to reconciliation with them, if one even existed, was long and fraught, and I wasn't sure I was ready to walk it. But my father's letter had given me a strange kind of peace. He had heard me. One of them had finally, truly, heard me. It was a start. My resolution wasn't about getting my family back. It was about getting myself back. And I was finally succeeding. It has now been almost a year since Caleb's 24th birthday dinner. A year since I walked out of that restaurant and into a new, unwritten chapter of my life. So much has changed, and yet, the most important changes have been internal. 2 months ago, I closed on my condo. It's a beautiful 2-bedroom place with a small balcony that gets the morning sun. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall is mine. It's a physical manifestation of the life I am building for myself with my own money on my own terms. It's quiet here. Sometimes, the silence is still punctuated by a pang of loneliness, a flicker of the old grief for the family I thought I had. But mostly, the quiet is peaceful. It's the sound of freedom. I have not seen my mother or my brother. My aunt keeps me updated. Caleb is still working his way through school, humbled but, from what I hear, still bitter. My mother maintains a stubborn, wounded silence. The family dynamic, as I knew it, is gone forever. I have, however, seen my father. About a month after I moved into my condo, he called me. His voice was hesitant on the phone when he asked if he could see my new place. I agreed. He came over one Saturday morning, holding a small, potted orchid as a housewarming gift. It was awkward and stilted at first. We talked about the weather, about his garden, about my work. We didn't talk about the fight, or the money, or Caleb, or Mom. But as he was leaving, he paused at the door. "It's a nice place, Stella," he said, looking around. "You've done well for yourself. I'm proud of you." The words were clumsy, but they were sincere. It was the first time in my adult life I had ever heard him say them. We've met for coffee a few times since. Our relationship is fragile, a sapling where a rotten old tree used to be, but it's something real. It's a beginning. Looking back, I don't see that night at the restaurant as a moment of destruction. I see it as a moment of liberation. For years, I believed that my value was tied to my utility. I thought that by giving and giving, I would eventually be loved and respected. The painful truth is that the more I gave, the less they saw me. My brother's cruel toast was a gift in disguise. It forced me to see the dynamic for what it was: unsustainable, unhealthy, and deeply disrespectful. So, for anyone out there who feels like the designated ATM, the endlessly reliable resource whose own needs are always last on the list, I hope you hear this. Setting boundaries is not selfish, it's an act of self-preservation. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you cannot earn respect from people who are committed to misunderstanding you. True family, whether it's the one you're born into or the one you build, doesn't demand your sacrifice. It celebrates your strength. It doesn't see your life as an inconvenience. It sees your happiness as essential. It took me 34 years to learn that lesson. It cost me the family I thought I knew, but it gave me back myself. And that is a trade I would make again in a heartbeat.